Uh, Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody, and welcome to our webinar, this time with the subject of love in times of the COVID-19. I am Rogelio Sosnik. I was born and trained in Buenos Aires. I belong to ABDEVA, the Psychoanalytic Society of Buenos Aires, and I moved to New York 32 years ago, and I'm psychoanalyst. I'm a board member of the International Journal, and I wrote some papers. And the other thing that I want to point it, that because the epidemic, I have to move out of the city since March, and I'm outside the city in Long Island in order to preserve myself and keep being healthy. At any rate, at this moment, I will try to give you my introduction to the panel. Julia Kristeva, who makes a semiotic approach to the language of love, thinks that the language of love is impossible, inadequate, elusive when one would like to be the most straightforward. It is a flight of metaphors, it's literature. But today, we are going to reflect on other dimensions of love. It will be on the way that the COVID-19 impinges in the experience of love, the way that we understand it and perceive it in psychoanalysis and in the clinical situation, in our patients and in us. With that in mind, I will attempt to organize a theoretical frame regarding love. I'm starting with Freud, the way that he defines it. I quote it. If for the moment we define loving as the relation of the ego to its sources of pleasure, the situation in which the ego loves itself only and is indifferent to the external world illustrates the first of the opposites which we find to love. It is clearly that Freud's definition is narcissistic love. This is the one that, as he describes, is projected to the external, idealized object to create a love relationship. After that, he described the two qualities of object relationships. The narcissistic one, based in the projection of the ego ideal and the idealized ego, and the analytic one, in which self-preservation and sexual impulses act together for the benefit of the creation of a new life. This altruistic destiny was an attribution of the analytic link, in which the ego instincts and the sexual instinct act together. So now we have the other in the center stage, and with it, the redefinition of what love is about. And here we have Melanie Klein's definition of it. I quote, as I have pointed out before, the ego comes to a realization of its love for a good object. Full identification with the object based on the libidinal attachment goes hand in hand with the anxiety for it, with his disintegration, with guilt and remorse, with a sense of responsibility for preserving it, and with sadness related to expectation of the impending loss of it. Those emotions, whether conscious or unconscious, are, in my view, the essentials and fundamental elements of the feelings that we call love. From the Lacanian point of view, the experience of love indissolubly ties together the symbolic, the imaginary, and the real. Strangling with this tight knot, reality vanishes. That means that in love, the self never ceases to be mistaken as to the reality of the other and of itself. It constitutes an experience of alienation. Freud thought of turning love into a cure. He went straight to the disorder that love reveals in the speaking being, exploring the symptoms that implies misconceptions. He did so with the hope of putting things back into place, which is to say, reestablishing reality, psychic reality, into place. Transference love became the royal road that sustains this process of transformation within psychic reality and the tool of the analytic process. Nowadays, we are facing a new reality that we share with our patients, in which the experience of love, perhaps, as Freud thought, can help us to recover the humanity necessary to rescue us from the plague with a minimum of damage. That is what our panelists today are going to help us to understand. I want now to introduce Florence Guyner, that is our first speaker. Florence is a Swiss and French psychoanalyst, past training member of the Paris Society, direct IPA training member of the Child and Adolescent Psychoanalysis. Florence Guyner wrote many papers and 3 books, often translated into English, Spanish, and Portuguese. She's preparing 2 more books to be issued next winter. Florence, your turn.
Thank you. The title of my paper is The Plague and the Cholera. External reality is changing at a much higher speed than what we can grasp and understand of it. Poets feel the time passing. Ô temps suspend ton vol, wrote Lamartine. While psychoanalysts are slowed down by the necessity to digest the impact of external reality upon psychic life. For the last 25 years or so, I've been part of the many psychoanalysts who question the basic concepts and technique of psychoanalysis in the light of the fast and deep modifications of our world and of our civil societies. For the last 10 years or so, I have been also very busy, like thousands of simple citizens, trying to find out how to stop the cholera of greedy lobbies who, by eviscerating our planet, accelerate the 6th wave of mass extinction of species already in progress. With the coming of the COVID-19 pandemic, we are unexpectedly caught between plague and cholera. We have little experience of the present time and no representation of our lives in the futures. We only feel that it will never come back as before, as Glenn Gabbard noticed in a previous webinar, but we hardly believe it. COVID-19 is a permanent threat of death. Each of us is simultaneously an agent and a potential victim of it. Danger is both outside and inside. One is not allowed to move freely anymore, and on the whole, no place is really safer than another. Drastic sanitary constraints are imposed to populations who live in extremely various economic conditions. They worsen the famine in the slums. They create it for the precarious workers who lose their job from one day to the other. And they make still worse the situation of the migrants. In the middle-class society, jobs are often preserved as long as people can work at home. Such a situation makes familial links more important, with good and bad consequences. Children experience a new relationship with their parents, but domestic violence is growing at an exponential speed. And we shall soon know if this pandemic has also provoked a baby boom. Factories and offices lose their functions of second place of life, and the transitional role of the journey between home and work doesn't exist anymore. In the confinement places, space of intimacy is constantly intruded, both by external events and by the internal flow of drives of each person living there and together. Whenever one goes outside, people look at you suspiciously. Sometimes anxiety is driving young people to deny the danger and to organize wild meetings with hundreds, even thousands of participants, changing the public space into a law-free zone. Free time is often experienced as a frightening emptiness, which encourages people to fill it with meaningless activities in order to avoid thinking. Death attacks blindly and with brutality our emotional links. One cannot visit anymore old parents, say adieu to the dying, organize funerals. This increases considerably the traumatic aspect of the mourning processes. In short, the COVID-19 pandemic confronts us to the necessity of finding new ways to understand our world, both internal and external. COVID binds us all together in a new way, and this is not only a handicap. Psychoanalysts also are put by COVID-19 in an unknown world where time and space lose their references. Psychoanalytic practice during the confinement gives us a lot to think about. The use of masks, social distance, individual covers for the analyst couch, phone or Skype sessions, virtual toys to play with children, more significant presence of the parents in the relation between the child and her analyst, and so on. In the times of pandemic, drives are confronted to unusual external and internal demands. Ego drives lead the game of life instinct and sexual drives. Each day is a new fight to control oneself and to find love, courage, and hope again. Intensity and quality of love circulating in the analytic field is primordial to maintain the relation with the patient through the new media we have to use. Love in the transference, sublimated love in the countertransference, love of curiosity for the functioning of psychic life. And as an Ebenmensch, the analyst plays also an important role, namely to help containing regressions in borderline patients. She may also use this opportunity to find a true contact with the infantile of the patient, the locus of the most authentic capacities to love. Love is also circulating through our activities of transmission. It is a precious vector of communication as we are experiencing just now. Just as World War I brought Freud to modify his previous theory on anxiety and to propose a second theory of the psychic apparatus, we observe today a deep modification of the place of anxiety in the mental functioning to the benefit of the signal anxiety and to the detriment of the traditional causality linked to Oedipal conflicts and sexual desires. First Freud, then Klein, taught us that if we want to stay in good health and keep on developing, we can't avoid the psychic work of mourning the past gone forever. We know it, but the pain linked to the process often repels us. Today, the fright to lose is overflowed by the reality of losses. Oscillation of mood between a paranoid, schizoid, and a depressive attitude has lost its average rhythm and reaches extreme level of paranoia and melancholia. Such a situation will last for a long time, I think. It might well be that the therapeutic aims and means of psychoanalysis are changing to a greater extent than what we are able to evaluate today. We shall have to be quick enough if we want to catch up reality with new means to cure psychic pain. Of course, we didn't expect COVID-19 plague. Whereas we participated significantly during the past 70 to the cholera of massive destruction of our mother planet, like glutton and careless children, drunk by a manner of false pretenses, sugar addicts, and dazzled by fireworks. However, COVID-19 pandemic brought in its wave an unexpected consequence. Most of the polluting human activities became frozen from one day to the next, all over the planet, hopefully, for a certain amount of time, each place. Well, in Europe, we had a sumptuous spring, such as we had not seen one since at least 50 years. During 2 months of confinement, 2 months only, the absence of pollution due to the suppression of work in the factories, of glyphosate spraying our fields, of air traffic, and of most of road traffic, allowed nature to recover a stupendous vitality expressed both in plants and animals. As a result, we, human beings, found beauty again, this crucial luxury necessary to keep on thinking and to endure the pain of living. Such a strength of wildlife drive gave me an idea and a hope, based on Byrne's saying, making the best of a bad job. Because COVID-19 is an inexorable killer, it cannot be ignored. It can be denied for a moment, but not ignored at the end, even by the most wealthy and powerful people. Silently and systematically, COVID-19 pandemic deflates the most cynical greed and the most perverse narcissism of the cholera actors. By means of the eternal human threat, death. Suppose the COVID plague would oblige the cholera actors to stop their murderous excavations for the sake of their own lives. Then COVID plague might rescue our planet. This point of view of mine is optimistic, but also realistic. It's the point of view of hope and love. Much love will be needed to enhance our capacities to dream and symbolize our present and to imagine our future. But we have little time to use COVID-19's dangers to look at our world in a new way and to put our love drives to the service of some solidarity where misery is striking, some imagination where jobs are collapsing, some serenity where anxiety is exploding, some empathy where solitude and mourning are taking place. Listening to help understanding, speaking to help accepting helplessness, educating to help forwarding curiosity, restoring the newborn's genuine capacities of attention, finding a new way to value the innate sensorial faculties, which are the ground of the capacity to think. Aren't these privileges attached to our competencies as psychoanalysts? In order to do so, we shall have to learn a lot more from our present experience and to figure out very quickly how to go on working. Future is already here, and if we do not acknowledge its new way, it might well be that psychoanalysis would become useless and perhaps even disappear, which I would not even imagine. Choosing love is choosing hope. My gratitude goes to the organizers of this webinar for this precious gift that helps us think and brings us somewhat closer to the poets. Thank you.
Okay. First of all, I need to apologize. I think that I didn't overcome my ambivalence about this medium, so I forget to explain you the format. I forget to tell you that you have to go to the right side of your screen and you can start to make questions to the panelists while they are presenting their papers or afterwards. The other thing that I want to clarify is that you can get the papers themselves if you go to the line that is said handouts. So you will have the version of the papers themselves. In addition, then after the panelists are going to present their papers, and we are going to have a time for exchange between them, and then we're going to be open to the questions that you are going to be sending to us. But you can start from now on to send your questions. So now the second panelist, and I apologize because I have to explain this in the beginning, but well, I'm not that familiar with the media. Okay, Janice Lieberman is a training and supervising analyst and faculty member of the Institute of Psychoanalytic Training and Research, IPTAR, in New York City, where she maintains a private practice. She is the author of 3 books, the most recent being Clinical Evolution of the Superego, Body and Gender in Psychoanalysis. She's a member of the IPA Committee on Gender and Diversity Studies and a liaison member of COWAP, the group of women. Okay, Janice, it's your turn.
Okay, thank you, Rogelio. I also am so pleased to be part of this panel and to be able to think more deeply about this topic, which has consumed so much of us. COVID-19 is a worldwide tragedy of epic proportions that has created painful bodily damage, death, loss of loved ones, social isolation, economic insecurity, and food insecurity for many. Its psychological aftermath will be with us for many years to come. The intrapsychic meanings of the pandemic for each individual must be considered. Relationships have been ridden with mistrust, even paranoia, over this invisible menace. Nevertheless, human beings are resilient, and for some, positive gains have emerged. Eros has conquered Thanatos in many instances, and we are, of course, here to talk about love. One could ask, as Tina Turner asked, what does love have to do with it? As we know, love makes the world go round. As 2 of my admired teachers, Martin Bergman and Ethel Person, noted many years ago when psychoanalysts actually wrote about love, there are many kinds of love: romantic, friendship, parental, filial, self-love, love of God, of country, of mankind, etc. But love has come to the fore in many places in these past several months. In my work with patients and supervisees in New York City, the epicenter of the pandemic, I have heard many love stories related to the quarantine, the lockdown, the demand that we shelter in place. Love is not pure as the poets would have it, but is, as we psychoanalysts know, often embedded with pain, aggression, masochism, sadism, narcissism. The vignettes I'm going to tell you are very sketchy due to time constraints. And these cases do not compare with the depiction of grand emotions described by Garcia Marquez in Love in the Time of Cholera, for which the series was named, or in Thomas Mann's great novella, Death in Venice, in which the elderly Aschenbach dies of cholera and his longing for the young boy Tazio. So, romantic love. Teresa is a single traveling salesperson in her early 40s who has been neurotically, obsessively searching for love for many years. Her sessions were replete with her desires for a series of men from the different cities to which she traveled for her work. Each of these men were periodically unavailable to her, and she was in denial as to why. She trusted each one in a childlike, naive manner. It seemed obvious to her analysts that each one, more than likely, was living with another woman or was married. The vicissitudes of her Oedipal phase were being repeated, replayed, re-experienced, with eventual discovery and heartache. Unrequited love was her theme song. Finally, Teresa met a recently divorced man, Edward, who seemed to be an appropriate match for her. Her analysts thought she had finally begun to overcome her neurosis. Mid-March, when New Yorkers were ordered to shelter in place, Edward told Teresa that he was joining his parents in the mountains a few hours from the city. They continued to text and speak on the phone. Teresa was isolated in her apartment alone, could not travel for her work, which would distract her from thoughts of Edward. She was finally able to admit that he was quarantining with another woman and did not love her. She was forced to look inside herself, to face that reality, and to recover painful childhood memories from her Oedipal years. She reluctantly remembered signs that her parents really loved one another, heretofore denied. Without this opportunity to stop her busy life and its complications, the repetition would have continued. The lockdown was especially difficult for those living alone. Elizabeth, a college professor, began treatment at this time, realizing that everyone she knew had someone to be with and she had no one. She planned now to make time to search for someone to love. The busy lives of New Yorkers in normal times helps them to defend against unwanted feelings and perceptions. The lockdown forced them to reflect, and their progress in treatment actually improved. Filial love. COVID-19 has challenged many families to make sacrifices in order to care for the elderly and the very young, the most vulnerable. Their love has manifested itself in staying in strict quarantine long after the government has relaxed restrictions and allowed certain stores to reopen, etc. Many families saw to it that grandparents stay far from grandchildren, causing many to suffer and feel especially lonely. If you love grandpa, stay far away from him. What does that do to that love bond? Mary and Bob went into lockdown at his parents' home outside the city, and his unmarried brother Nat joined them. They did not leave the house even to buy groceries for several months until the lockdown ended, and most people went outside and shopped and went to restaurants and exercised. Mary and Bob wanted to see their apartment in the city and to bring back some clothes. Nat accused them of not loving their parents, that going into the city was tantamount to killing them and him, and that they could not come back if they left for a few hours. Needless to say, Bob had to work hard in his therapy to access long repressed memories of his brother's competitiveness with him for their parents' love, their sibling rivalry, in order to free himself and Mary to go into the city. He had to access his love for his parents while feeling angry at them in the midst of his brother's self-righteousness and paranoia. He and Mary went into the city, and his parents took them back. Eventually, they decided to move back home and leave the claustrophobic circumstances his parents were living in. Bob had to work through his fear that separating from his family in this way would lead to banishment and loss of love, which it did not. This love story has been told many times as families quarantining together re-experience old conflicts relived in the context of COVID-19 and the personal assessment of what is safe and what will protect one's loved ones. Some seem to go overboard with this, and it seems that love is mixed with a need to control others, fear of the outside world, undoing the pain of separation when adult children leave, etc. My final example is of self-love during the pandemic. Marjorie, a 70-year-old single woman, lived a very isolated life prior to the pandemic. Travel to her sessions was fraught with irritation about subway noise and nasty people in the streets. Her relationships with others, male and female, usually started out well, even idealized, but soon morphed into anger and pettiness. Her therapist was worried about the lockdown that would isolate her even further. To her surprise, Marjorie began to thrive using Zoom. She joined art classes, writing classes, cooking classes, in which she received positive feedback from her new classmates. She began to dress up and get made up for these classes, where she could see her own image as others saw her too. She chose to be on FaceTime with her therapist and called attention to her hair, her face, the rooms in her apartment, which the therapist never had seen. After having ignored her therapist in the therapist's office for years, she actually asked where she was, appreciated a photograph she saw and liked. Self-love, her narcissism seemed improved because of this mirroring experience. Clearly, she seemed happier and pleased with herself. It could take years of therapy until she could show concern or caring about those sick or dying outside her own cocoon. This is just a beginning effort on my part to document a few of the many varieties of love the pandemic, the lockdown have manifested. I have, and many of my colleagues have reported, sessions going well on the phone and video. It is too soon to know if the changes we have witnessed will be lasting. And I would say that love has a lot to do with it.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to continue explaining the format because it took me very long time, more than I thought it will take me. After the next presentation, Maria Lucrecia Scherer, we are going to have 20 minutes of exchanges between the three panelists. And after that time, we have another half an hour for the questions that you are sending to us in the exchange with the panelists. So now I'm going to introduce Maria Lucrecia Scherer-Savasky. She's a psychoanalyst and a psychiatrist with master and doctor's degrees in medical sciences by Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul, Brazil. Member professor, ex-president, ex-director of children and adolescents, and ex-director of the Institute of Porto Alegre Psychoanalytic Society. So, Maria Lucrecia, the time is yours.
Hi. Here, good afternoon for everyone. I'm so glad to listen the two and the three beautiful papers we just read, we just listened. Lovely and consistent papers. I'm very grateful about that. Good afternoon, Rogelio Sosnig, our coordinator, my colleagues of this occasion, Florence Guyner and Janice Lieberman. I would like to thank our President, Virginia Ungar, the Vice President, Sergio Nick, the IPA webinar coordinator, Sylvia Warburg, and a special thanks to Claudio Ezerick for the great opportunity to participate in this webinar about love in times of COVID-19. 10 years ago, in the good old times, when crowding was still possible, I announced at the hospital that I would be absent to celebrate our 40th wedding anniversary. I commented, we were happy and that we knew it. An eminent colleague asked, surprised, does that exist? The question has returned many times and returns now when we have a chance to talking about love in times of COVID-19. For us, analysts, health workers, and so many other workers, including artists, writers, poets, our answer is, we believe so, yes. And its most various forms, as we could hear before this speech. From the silent and necessary reflective place. I'm sorry, something happened. I skipped one of these papers. However, we are facing such a blow to humanity, and particularly to us Brazilians, whose abysmal social differences and deficiencies in the construction of our nation have been so accentuated by the pandemic, which today reaches the sad mark of over 100,000 deaths, that this moment we come to falter in our belief. Love in times of COVID-19, a fair tribute to Gabriel Garcia Marquez in his Love in Times of Cholera, whose inspiration comes from the true story of his own parents, who, in similar situation to the characters, plagued by the cholera epidemic at the end of the 19th century, had to face the opposition of the bride's father to the wedding, among so many other social and cultural vicissitudes and contradictions typical of the time. The novel, besides uncountable, delicious, and historical descriptions, exalts the lover's perseverance and undoubtedness in prose and verse to pour out in passion and in the unshakable belief that the love between a man and a woman can last a lifetime. Regarding all reading as all art is currently a smoothing balm in the midst of the storm. To those who don't know him, I strongly recommend reading this book. The subject is beautiful and can be approached from most different vertices, love. But here, among psychoanalysts, I believe we are one of the few strongholds of the humanism and preservation of love, care for the others, along with art, with literature, with thinking, with consideration for the lifetime, for karyos. We are moreover invaded by a dizzying avalanche of information which can distance us from the silent and necessarily reflective place of our daily work. For me, this webinar represents a momentary anchorage so that in the midst of the stormy sea of pandemic, we can search in our lives, in our histories, in our psychoanalytic institutions, all the provisions of love that we have collected throughout our lives, so that we can use them generously in this moment of turbulence, lack, emptiness, pain, uncertainty, loneliness, deobjectization, helplessness, and tragic shipwrecks. The plague affects everyone. However, to cope with it, some have a greater supply of love than others. Love permeates the story of our lives. From the first moment outside our mother's womb, or even before, we have bathed in love, because otherwise we would not have the privileged opportunity of having got here. In our first moments of helplessness, we would not have survived without a minimum of loving investment, nor would we have been able to follow the successful trajectory that we have, to have reached such a decent level of lifestyle, and to have the opportunity to exercise a delicate profession which allows us to work with passion. If it were not for the predominance, even if minimal, of Eros in the clash with Thanatos, in the life of our parents and of our grandparents, and of an entire village, as the African say, we would not be here. If our generous mothers, wet nurses, or father had not offered us a breast for us to breastfeed, or a nursing bottle that would curb our hunger or our fantasies of distraction, we probably would not have survived. Breastfeeding at the mother's breast become the paradigm for every bond of love. We know that in the first days of life, had we not been held by the good enough mother with a more or less stable and predictable rhythm, how would have started the construction of ourself, basic trust in people, in life and in love, without the presence of the other, external object, to use our jargon, with its comings and goings, enabling the baby to experience encounters and separations? How would it forge the building of its internal objects? The psychic reality, which is gradually forming, needs the interrelation with external reality of intense love. Without the chance of a transitional space, how would we have developed our fantasy, our language, and everything else? Of course, as a privileged wedge, we still had a second chance to recap our lives throughout our personal analysis. The cases that have come to us during the past 4 months have been very different. In one hand, babies born into families already well structured and loving before the pandemic. All restrictions were observed regarding hygiene, visits while still at the hospital and also at home. The pandemic situation was far in these families being traumatic, favored the intimacy of the couple a lot, and facilitate the interaction of the mother with the baby. The presence of the father at home was, as the mothers declare, a blessing. On the other hand, in the hill slum, our 16-year-old young girl, left alone, walking in the rain, without coat, with her 2-week-old baby, due to its constant crying, in order to be attended to the public health center. Since she has AIDS, she cannot breastfeed. She just stopped using drugs. And she has broken off her relationship with her own mother for having been physically abused. The questioning I raise is now, what provision of love will this little one has to face the vicissitudes of life? This is one in hundreds and thousands of cases around here. The profound difference of possibilities between one and the others leads me to make the following question as an analyst and as a citizen. How could I widen my working scope beyond my consulting room? Since I believe I had such efficient tools for helping the making of being, to make him or her be whole and happy. In Brazil, in the trail of the pandemic and confinement, there has been an increase of violence, ill treatment of children, teenagers, and women, including the numbers of feminicides. If we could study those families, would we not find deficiencies in the primitive object relations? I believe that among the complexity of predisposing factors, this one would be one of the probable ones. I would only like to share with my board colleagues here this idea for an a posteriori discussion and how it will happen later on in life. Much still could be said about love and lack of love in my country. But I am about to finish with love finally. Therefore, even after death, and now, how many deaths have we? Even after death, we have the possible good memories when life was lovingly lived. As a Brazilian, I would like to end with the beauty of Carnival, for instance, with the purity of Orpheus' love for Eurídice, film made here in Brazil, Orfeu Negro in 1956, that even after his death, he leaves his guitar instead of the lyre for the children to be able to continue with his magic, his music, and his dance. I would like to finish with a song of Vinícius de Moraes and the composer Tom Jobim. And since it is out of my power to sing, I leave some lines of the Brazilian great poet. And therefore, when it later comes for me, perhaps death, anguish of us who are alive, perhaps solitude, and of those who love, might tell me about the love I felt, not immortal, since it is a flame, but be infinite while it lasts. Thank you, Roger.
Thank you. Now I'll continue explaining how we are going to proceed. Now we have 20 minutes of exchanges between the three panelists, and then I'm going to be open to read the questions that you have been sending to us during this time, and you can continue sending questions, obviously, and so we can start the last session, that is questions and answers. Okay, so the time is for the three panelists to exchange between themselves. Okay. Yes, Yanis.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Marie and Florence what they think. I mean, because we have had such a range of topics, amongst the three of us, about doing treatment, doing psychoanalytic treatment at this time. patients who are talking about climate change, as opposed to patients who are talking about the fact that they can't get a haircut. The global, the philosophical issues that surmount us, the future, and of course, notions of death. And as opposed to what I have heard so much in my own practice, and it may be because there are strong defenses erected against it, because we are right in the center, with ambulances going up and down the avenue all day long, that kind of thing. But patients really talking very concretely about survival issues, how they were going to get food, how they were going to store toilet paper, which they thought was going to be, at a minimum. Doing things like being on Zoom meetings and trying to do art classes, and but really containing themselves within a cocoon, even when it's a whole family. And I did not hear so much discussion of the whole world or of what's going on in the world. And I wondered about each of you in different parts of the world, and maybe a different kind of patient, what you heard.
Well, I was thinking that the three of us, represented very well the whole range, as Janice just mentioned now, of life preoccupations for everybody. And I was thinking that whenever there is a big danger, people sometimes catch up a very small thing. One could call it a sort of transitional object to grasp, and this helps them to overcome their anxiety. And I think it's normal and it's very important too. However, as psychoanalyst, and maybe it's also linked, it's definitely linked to my age too, I think it's important to try and have sometimes a vision as broad as possible, knowing that it will never be broad enough, and knowing also that it's not in order to be desperate, it's just in order to try and understand the reality that our patients are feeling and not able to express because it's too big. And of course, we all know stories of people who were rescued and saved because they grasped a little, very little part of reality, or very little object. And this is so important. It doesn't prevent us to try and to be aware that if we do not, I think the three of us had the same impression, that psychoanalysis has really to keep on listening to the new ways we can invent to help people to grasp things that are just going to come now. I think it's important in Janice's example, it was very clear that what was important was not the 10th or 100th time your patient was experiencing that she was always in an edible situation and always missed the pace and had no man, but that it happened just in these circumstances has a meaning of repeating something of her childhood, of also a very important transferential meaning, because she also was alone with the hope that you would be alone too. So, I think we have really, and we are lucky to be able to discuss today. I will stop because we are lucky to have these different spans of visions of reality, psychic reality, but I think the three of us, the four of us with Rogelio, are aware that we really have to be open to new ways of working, and we don't know which ones. There is no theory. We have to invent it.
Thank you. I would like to say something to Janice and to Florence. I would listen Florence forever. What I am saying, Janice, I really don't know what will happen, but we are seeing just 4 months of our practical, and I'm dealing a lot of with children and with people who works in hospitals and people who are nearby these situations. And not all my patients I see by Skype, or some of them I see in my office with this mask so weird, and with this distance, alcohol everywhere. But they are in the front line. So I think that I'll be nearby. And in the supervision, some of my my students, yeah, thank you. They are with COVID now. So sometimes I have, so we change for the line sessions or line online supervisions. But as Florence said, and you said in your, we have to be creative. I think I am more close to the phone, because some patients call me, they send me pictures. As Florence said, we hold to some transitional objects. So they send pictures of the pets, cats, dogs, and the sessions are online are so different in the car or in the apartment or any place. So the setting changed, and I think we are being flexible, and it's very appropriate to do this, to adapt to the conditions that the vicissitudes of this moment present to us. So I'm very grateful, as all of you, and I'm because it's been very helpful. It's a kind of balm also in the situation of this pandemic moment. We have very terrible things that we hear, as Rogelio was saying before, a lot of deaths and problems inside the hospitals, problems with the colleagues. So it's a very painful moment. But in the same way, people are organizing themselves to help, to hear, to listen. And I think our institution is doing very well. It's doing webinars, lives, and everything. So to support the group of professionals. I think it's something very helpful in this moment for us. I think it's okay, Rogelio. But okay.
Well,
the external world is invading our internal world in so many ways that we are, I think that sometimes I think in Anna Freud, when she relates the observation of the children when London was bombarded. So what I was thinking is, she said that if the mother was so anxious, the child is anxious too. And the other mothers were more secure, maybe with more love accumulated. They can help better with the child. So in this situation, I think we analysts are in the place of the parents in some ways. And we also are in that. And I think we have to help ourselves in order to be able to help our patients, our students. And that's what I think. And we use the dissociation, I think, as in favor of the ego sometimes.
Yes,
And
I must say that, you know, again, certainly in New York, because the rate of COVID was so high, you know,
Here.
almost instantly, that as of about March 13th, 14th, 15th, in a few days, everything shut down. There were no cars in the street. I mean, it was amazing. It was surreal. But so quickly, you know, if you think of how slowly technique moves, in you know, in a few days, people just went into phone sessions or online sessions, and we adapted, and the patients adapted.
yes.
And one would think, we would have thought patients would have left treatment at that point. No, they stayed, and more came in. So, you know, but it certainly is that to tune to your patients and what their concerns are, and then to get out of session and turn on the television and find out what's going on in the outside world. You know, for me, where I was, to see the healthcare workers in their blue garb going back and forth to the hospital. It was very, very strange, because there was a real split between listening to my patients and their concerns and their family concerns, and then there's this outside world. And, you know, there was certainly kind of a wall built, I think, so that all of us could cope with it. We were so close to it. You know, the fear of going out in the street and catching it, you know, so you were safe in your own home. You know, very, very different, you know, from seeing patients in your office, continuing to see them face to face, or, you know, the way it happened in other cities, other places in the world.
We are seeing people. Sometimes we go outside, and I used to go to my office 3 times a week. And I see some patients personally, and some of them I see online. But you know what? Sometimes we say we're still here, so let's live this day. This day is a blessing, so let's use it to know your history, your life, your inner conflicts, because it's an opportunity. And I think to be here and to be with our patients, with our students, is a good, a big, and huge opportunity to recap our lives. And the patients are very grateful. I don't know if I understood very well your question, Janice. I'm sorry.
I think you helped to answer it. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, well, I wanted to add, it's an opportunity, but it must not be an excuse to not to see what's happening. And you discussed it very well, Maria Lucrecia, as well. So I mean, it's important not to take it as a refuge, you know, as a means not to see what's happening, and sort of being in a dream, in a false dream. I see that there are a lot of questions of the people who are listening to us. I don't know if Aurelio wants us to start with it, or
No,
I think so.
I think that we can start with the questions. If you are open to, it's
Of
okay.
course.
what do you think?
Yes.
So
Okay.
there are several questions. I'm mute, or I'm mute? I am?
No, but not mute.
Can someone unmute me? Okay. I said we're having several questions, and I'm going to try to organize that question, because some of them has to be with the issue about isolation. and the repercussion in the clinical experience, So that is one of the factors that is in the questions. Um, there are two questions connected in this regard. One is, what do you think about virtual love during the pandemic? It seems that people are having more intimacy rather than sex. The other is, uh, could you say something? We say, could you explain a bit more? No, could you say something of the nature of dreaming in the times of the COVID in order to cope with the lack of touch with external sources of comfort and love? I think that these two questions connect in some ways. Yeah.
May I just one thing? What I am listening about dreams, I just remind some of them. People dreaming with they don't know more the address, or they don't know where they are going. They took a train and then don't know where it's going to go. So this is a kind of interesting dreams that it seems like a portrait of our moments. We really don't know where we are going. And as I don't know if Janice or Florence, one of both of you said, we have to be quick to help people to deal with the situation of uncertainty. And about the sex, I think here in Brazil and maybe all over the world, as I can listen, this sex with the machines, I am listening. They are more and more, and sometimes in using the this online communication. Sometimes I think it's a rounding with love too, but in most times, and as a psychoanalyst of children, I'm so worried about the alleviation of little children. We listen more and more situations of children who is alleviated by this perverse rackers and things like that. So I'm really worried about that. But in the middle of all of this, there are some reasonable situations that they need to face each other by the thing. But it's so, I have to deal with it myself because to understand matter and to, to accept a little bit more this new situation. But it's a strange to me. Maybe Janice, it's more familiar with, I don't know if Florence or Rogelio, but I listen a lot about that, and I'm very worried about that.
You mean about digital?
Yes, and the alleviation of little children with this way of communication that a lot of times the parents don't know what's going on, and
right. No, well, the problem, that we've seen, particularly with when both parents are working and they're working online,
yeah.
They don't have, and people are afraid to have babysitters come to the house. They don't want to, someone else coming in to watch the children. So fallback position is that let the children be on their own computers or their own iPads. And also that many of the children are being schooled on those computers and iPads, where they have no contact with other children. you know, so it's really an unknown what these children are going to emerge as, what their issues are going to be, that they're taking in the outside world through a device.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that what is so interesting is that the lines of cleavage, of splitting, are changing totally with this traumatic event that is relentless, that is every day, every night, everywhere. And so it's important for us to be able to follow that. I also experienced what you said about the parents and the children, and the fact that people are reluctant to have us see what is in their places. You know, it's a sort of intrusive. I wanted to answer a question that is addressed to me about the infantile. Just to say that for me, the infantile, I wrote a lot on the subject, and infantile is the locus of the capacity to love, because this capacity exists in infants and then in children, and then of course it depends on how life is with the child. Not only because it can happen good or bad things to a child, but also relating to what Cyrulnik calls resilience. Some children are incredibly resilient. You know,
that's right.
they have been mistreated, as Maria Lucretia was speaking of the young girl with her baby, and they have been mistreated, and still they believe in life. They believe in the possibility to go on. So this comes, according to me, from their infantile. And don't forget that we never lose our infantile unless we are too splitted. And when we are an adult, we become a sort of dried person, but it's not our case, fortunately. So this was I wanted to explain that, and it has also a link to the question that is asking very pertinently whether we think that love is driving our relationship, social relationship. Of course not. Of course, I mean, it's not only love, it's always a mixture. And sometimes with the COVID, this is why some people become really paranoid or melancholic. And we always have to be in between and not hide us in or protect us as being in a dream. This is just I wanted to say. Thank you.
I have another question related with the fact of isolation, and it's thanks to the three for their moving presentations. What do you think about quite paradoxical situation of being hyper-connected and feeling isolated and dealing with feelings of loneliness?
Well, because the main connection is inside, with a good object inside. So we can be connected outside and feeling terribly lonely inside.
And I have another question regarding isolation also. Is our tendency is to think that social interactions are based on love. Do you think that in reality, as Freud says, the fact is that social interactions help us to modulate aggression, and that the current isolation due to the pandemic is the cause of an increased paranoia and the effect that they can have in children when they cannot interact between them and they have to spend the time seeing the camera and not having this possibility to exercise social interactions?
Well, I don't know about the cameras. You know, cameras are what we are making them do. But for the rest, I already answered. I think Lucretia wants to say something.
I just want to say that it depends. If the person had previous the pandemic, or even previous all this possibility of communication online, if she has a solid beginning and the possibility to construct good inner objects, this person will be able to deal better even with this avalanche of information. Uh, I think everything depends on the beginnings. Yesterday, one of our colleagues named Viviane Springs, she said something about I'm sorry, now I forget. I also about fanatism, and she said something that I have to study much more, I think. She said something very, very important, that she said, if you build a child, preparing a child to deal with frustration, maybe she'll be able to love better. And they found that the fanatics people, they in the beginning have less tolerance of frustration. So it's something that I'm thinking about. I think it's very important, this situation.
Mm.
Yes. Can I?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the issue of isolation and inner objects, that I think if we cannot go about our business and see other people, even passing people in the street, going to the store, having exchanges with others, or even when you're out, like now, where I am now, you can go and shop and eat out and be with your friends at a distance. The use of the mask then prevents you from expressing your love, your happiness at seeing someone, your anger. That is, the face and the facial expressions are not there to read. And I think this is also very problematic for most people. I think some of the strongest people I know, whether they're colleagues, friends, patients, report a terrible feeling inside themselves on an ongoing basis. Yes, they function, they do what they have to do, they work, they play, they interact with their children, but they feel terrible in a way they don't recall ever feeling in their lives. And I think that this is not just the fear of the illness, but really that we have been isolated from our human interactions.
Yeah.
And we're used to so many of them. You know, we analysts, if you're not seeing your patients, you don't have that either, no matter how much you may see them on Zoom or talk to them on the phone.
Yeah, that's right.
Along these lines, there is another question, and that is, can we think of the love that we're experiencing from and to our patients? It is love, or is an increased interdependency as a way to neutralize the isolation that both of us are feeling?
Well, do you know any relation with love, any kind of love, that doesn't imply also dependence? I don't.
Yeah.
I think you can't avoid it. You can't have a cake and eat it. Well, because the question is the question of transference, but the question is also the question of the Nebenmensch, you know. I mean, we are human beings. We are not different from other people, except because we pretend to have a technique and a possibility and a clinical experience. But dependence is everywhere. The problem is how we accept it. And if we don't accept it, we become more dependent, I think.
That's right.
Mhm, mhm. The fact is that I think there is a second reading of and second intention in this question, because is, you know, our tendency is to think love as a sexual tendency, and you know, but at this moment it's so important, the surviving aspect of the connections, you know, that that is the reason of this kind of paradoxical kind of question. Yeah. Um, I think that uh, the dreaming, question, I would like to go back to that, because many of us in our clinical experience, when we started to shift from one frame to the new one, we're having a lot of responses from our patients in terms of, you know, bringing more dreams and working more dreams to the sessions. And that was a kind of something that here in the American Psychoanalytic Association has been, many people were having this experience and they were sharing as a phenomenon. And perhaps that was an issue about intimacy, perhaps was an issue that, you know, the lack of noise, external noise, made them become more introspective. And in that regard, you know, reorganizing themselves, and then, you know, reorganizing the links that they have with their family and within the family relationships, you know, and in the couples, you know. In other words, it became a kind of productive time also. So
Yes.
I think that is something that everybody was really very encouraged with regard to the new distancing and proximity, paradoxical, you know, proximity and distancing from our patients. Yeah, yeah.
I think we could say that because of the fact that patients were home and they were not traveling back and forth to their sessions, they were not going to work, they could focus on themselves
That's right.
and experience their love of psychoanalysis. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, that this became very, very important to a number of patients where they didn't have the time to really let their sessions seep in and develop and be able to think about them because of the busy lives, the busy urban lives that they lead. So it's been a very special time, you know, the silver lining. Yes.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you.
Go on.
Can I say something about the mask? Because I think that the mask is an opportunity to enhance our capacity of representation. Don't forget the Commedia dell'arte. We can see after a certain amount of time, now in Switzerland, finally everybody is obliged, it's compulsory to wear the mask in the shop, in the stores, and in fact people were very reluctant to do so, but finally they get used to it and they see the expression behind the mask, you know, because in fact what we see is what we feel, and what we feel is our unconscious who feels it. So it's the metaphor of the iceberg, you know. In fact, we feel much more than we can be conscious of feeling.
That's true.
Yes, in addition that the mask now have a kind of protective of the other, you know, it's relation
That's
also.
right.
That is what happened nowadays in our country, in America, in the big discussion in politics about, you know, take care of the other by wearing mask, and not only take care of yourself, but take care of the other.
Yes,
Yeah.
of course. As psychoanalysts, we can sort of take this opportunity, as we take the opportunity of the solitude or of the confinement to sort of it's an opportunity to be more inside than outside. And with the mask, it's an opportunity to enhance our capacities, or our patients' capacities of representation on what we cannot see, which is psyche.
Yeah, that's right.
I think that we are going to be closing these questions and responses section, because we have to read, what happened. I had to make the announcements of what happened next.
Okay.
Okay.
The upcoming webinars is ¿Qué hay de nuevo en este mundo en cambio? That is going to be Friday, 21st August. Yolanda Gamper, Janine Puget, and Anna Rosa Trachtenberg. And then in German, Ein neues Anbegachen. I'm sorry for my in the culture, the Anselme under die Geschaft. Okay, it's in the you see in your scripts, so we have this, and we need to close, to say, stay connected. You can get the papers that have been presented today if you go to, to the handouts. Okay, so I think that we are closing. I hope that people feel okay. Okay. Good morning.
Bye-bye.
Night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, Regina. Thank you very much. So, thank you.
It was really funny.